I do think there is a value in having an understanding of institutions as political actors in a politicized country, and taking some of those techniques, polling, message testing, focus groups, and applying them to the work that we do here in marketing and communicating about the university.
Hey, Mallory, let's do some quick math together, please. What is the ROI on a 30-second spot that cost $1,500 to make and gets 250 million impressions?
Oh my gosh. Math is hard, but you know what? That sounds like a really nice bottle of Scotch, Volt.
It totally does, right? And that is the perfect lead-in for today's Higher Ed Icons episode with Jack Martin. For those of you who don't know Jack, he is the Vice President for Marketing and Communications at the University of Washington. He chairs the Big Ten Academic Alliance's Senior University Marketing and Communications Officers Group. Before Jack joined UW in 2015, he was served as the Director of Strategic Communications at the University of Kansas, from which he graduated. Before that, he was the Director of Strategic Communications for Kansas Governor Kathleen Sebelius, Communications Director for Congressman Dennis Moore, and Senior Account Executive at McNeely, Piggott, and Fox Public Relations in Nashville. What the bio doesn't tell you is that Jack is one of my heroes in digital storytelling. I have been following the work of his team and of him for more than a decade now, and it is a personal dream of mine that he is here for this episode of Higher Ed Icons.
And speaking of dreams, we have to give a shout out to On Deck Marketing for making our dreams come true, to even be able to interview Jack, right, as our sponsor. We are so appreciative to On Deck. I think as we prep for this conversation about storytelling, it occurs to me that a student cannot choose an institution that they don't encounter, right? And familiarity is going to matter even more than ever in this world where discoverability might start with artificial intelligence. Students are maybe starting their search on Google, and AI is now Google, but they are still searching for belonging and purpose and trusted communities. And their enrollment decisions are forming over time, right? They're not going to convert in a single moment. So storytelling matters more than ever, so that they can see your name repeatedly, that they can hear about your institution from others in their community, and that they can recognize the opportunities and the programs that you put in front of them. So thank you to On Deck for sponsoring this conversation. And hey, Volt, let's get into this chat with Jack.
Let's do it. So, Jack, when we were talking and prepping for this episode, I discovered something about your background that I didn't realize before. I didn't know that you had come to your work at University of Washington from politics, from polling, and that you were, before you were doing storytelling for UW, you were into surveying, messaging, persuasion, and I'm just curious, how did that background influence the way you thought about communications at UW?
Yeah, well, I suppose you get influenced by how you start out in your career. And I did start out in campaigns and in government. I did a little bit of private sector PR work, but left politics and government back in 2007 to go to work at the University of Kansas, and never have really left politics. Especially, public universities are, they're political entities just within them and the campus politics. But I think we've seen increasingly how higher education in a polarized nation has become itself politicized, and so we've been able to apply some of the lessons I learned back in my campaign days, as well as just a belief in the importance of knowing what our audiences think about us, and using survey research and focus groups and other techniques that very familiar with and a fan of in the campaign setting to influence how we approach things here at UW and before that at KU. Because I do think that there is a certain naivete in higher education when it comes to universities as political actors. You can't, be institutions that receive hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars collectively in federal research and in state appropriations and in financial aid. You can't do scholarship on, pressing and sometimes controversial issues. And you can't make statements on those issues without being seen as political. And so I do think there is a value in having an understanding of institutions as political actors in a politicized country, and taking some of those techniques, polling, message testing, focus groups, and applying them to the work that we do here in marketing and communicating about the university.
Very cool. And is that something that you basically applied from the very beginning? Was that a discipline that you brought in from day one to your work?
It was, and it does. It goes back to that kind of starting in campaigns where you don't want to ever have a poll-driven candidate, and I wouldn't want to have a poll-driven university. But it is important, particularly for a public university, to understand what our state thinks about us. What should the priorities of the University of Washington be? Where do they think we're doing well? Where do they think we're falling short? And to apply that to alumni and to other stakeholder audiences, prospective students that we want to communicate with, and we want to talk about things they care about. And we want to use words they understand. I mean, that's my motto: talk about things people care about and words they understand. And one of the ways we can get at that is through survey research.
As I'm listening to you, there's a tension around how campaign thinking is about winning, right? You want your candidate to win.
Yeah.
And there's also a lot of speed required in decision making. You need to take a position. You need to put the stake in the ground, be willing to do it, take the position, and have some comfortability with being disliked by some audiences in order to be loved by others. And all of those things feel very different to me than the landscape that you operate in within the university. And I'd love to hear you sound off on that.
Yeah, well, I worked in state government before going into higher education, and I thought state government moved slow, and then went into higher ed and learned it's a whole different pace. But I'd like to say that when I was the governor, when I was in the governor's office, the governor would say, "We're going to do this," and we say, "Absolutely, Madam Governor, we'll get going on that." And you go into higher ed, and the president or the chancellor says, "We're going to do this," and people are like, "Absolutely, we're going to get a committee started to consider whether we should do this."
And a committee for the committee to build consensus,
exactly.
so the right committee gets built. And that's what I'm getting at. There is a clear you're on a different end of the spectrum when it comes to the speed at which things can be decided and planting that stake in the ground.
Yeah, there is, and I think we have more flexibility in Marcom shops to adjust the campaigns that we're running, the content that we're putting out there. But Mallory, you're correct that in politics you want 50% plus one. You just need one more vote than the next candidate. Higher education, I want to have as many people in the state of Washington believe that the University of Washington is there to represent them, is there working for them, is making their lives better and the lives of their families and communities better. And we're never going to get there. And that's, I think, a harder task than you would have in a campaign. I think working in higher education is far harder than working in politics, having now done both. But we do have that opportunity to see what are the things that broadly are supported by the people of Washington, by our alumni, other stakeholders. What can people agree on? And there's three things that in our survey research people absolutely agree on. They want higher education to be affordable. They want it to prepare students for future careers, and they want it to be world-class. After that, you have some other things about preparing students to be, contribute to their communities, conduct medical research, scientific research. But those three that I call the big three, when I give my presentations and I have a polling quiz that I do for folks, those three, if we're not able to address those, particularly around those questions of cost and really value, we're not going to be able to make progress on any of the other things that are important to the university, that are important to the state. But first and foremost, as a university, people think we need to be focusing on our students. And the survey research helps reinforce that. It's not just me coming in with my opinion. It's being able to say, look, we asked 800 Washington residents this fall. We're going to ask another 800 here coming up. We ask our alumni every fall. And be able to show to leadership and to other folks, this is what people are telling us. And we don't have to, again, be a poll-driven university. I would never want us to be in that situation. We have a mission, we have values, but we can use what we learn about our audience's views to shape both, how we're talking about it, to tell our story better, and to find, are there areas where we're really falling short? And I think higher education broadly, affordability, value, that's an area people are telling us we're falling short. So in addition to having a better story to tell, or telling our story better, how can we have a better story to tell? By making those policy changes to address concerns such as around cost and value.
Yeah, and I understand this is one of your president's signature priorities too, right?
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk about storytelling because, hi, icon Jack, you're here for a reason. And Voltaire and I have admired the storytelling program at UW for a very long time. So let's take us through, how did you build this program? What were you trying to accomplish? What were you trying to prove?
Yeah, well, I think like everybody, we were inspired by New York Times Snowfall. I was also personally inspired by Planet Money Makes a T-shirt. I still go back to that last video, kind of showing the humanity of all the people involved in the supply chain of making a T-shirt. It's not something you would think of this is this really emotional thing, but then you see the people behind it, and so that sort of storytelling where it is in depth, it is immersive, it's visually interesting. That was something that inspired our team, and I really do want to give credit to our team. They're the ones that go out and produce these. I just have the good fortune to be invited to talk about this work. But we had a team that said, we have the Alaska Salmon program, and it goes out and it helps forecast and protect salmon fisheries, which is hugely important to the economy, hugely important to the environment. And we have students that go up to Alaska that take part in this field research. And we want to go up there and produce a immersive story about it. Photo, video, obviously great writing and editing and design. And so a living laboratory was the result of that. That was our first, what we call immersive story. And we did 2 or 3 of those. And we were coming up on the launch of the Be Boundless for Washington for the World comprehensive fundraising campaign. And it was actually the vice president for development at the time who came to us and said, I think we should make immersive storytelling a centerpiece of how we communicate about the value of the University of Washington to our donors and our prospective donors, to inspire them to join us, to give through the university. And so we ended up doing at least one of these in-depth multimedia stories with a different bespoke design, obviously all still branded, but with a different design for each one, for every campus, school, college, and major unit, such as athletics and libraries, over the course of the campaign. And it got to where we were doing a couple of these a month. And, we can talk about kind of why we've shifted gears here more recently as that pace, was difficult to maintain, but it did give us this, just tremendous body of work, these stories themselves, but then also the content from the stories that we could use in our advertising, in our approaches to donors, and also that the colleges and the schools and the campuses could use. I'll still walk around campus and, photos from that original Living Lab story are used as the backdrop for flyers down in College of the Environment. And so we have now, this collection of assets that we can use. And, the goal was never, we're going to drive $1 million in donations from a story. It really was to set that foundation, to set that inspiration out there, and then to enable our fundraisers and our deans and other folks to go out and use that inspiration as a hook, as an entree to invite people to join us and to talk about, more specifically, what might interest them in the campaign.
I've got to tell you, that living laboratory story that you mentioned, I loved Snowfall. I thought Snowfall was incredible. And when I saw the work that you were putting out, I just thought to myself, this is the best higher education storytelling I have ever seen. So there are 2 things that I want to explore with you there. The first is, How did you make that happen? Because what we were talking about was like illustrations, infographics,
Yep.
moving images, video. I mean, it was literally a direct application of all of the best practice of snowfall to a higher education context. And I think that people listening to this would love to know, how did you make that happen? And
Yeah.
then secondly, I want to explore with you how the strategy has evolved over time, because I have watched your work. I literally use your work in every single digital storytelling workshop I do because I think it is so brilliant. So first, tell us how you made the magic happen, and then let's talk a little bit about how the magic has evolved.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And again, all credit to our team here in University Marketing Communications. We had a team of folks who's they proposed going up to Alaska, a small team, kind of a little field team, photographer, writer, videographer, and editor. And they went up there, they collected this, and then you have folks in our web team who would, and our design teams who would then be able to apply all this content to creating a layout that really fully encapsulated the story that we were trying to tell. And Living Laboratory is actually one of the less complex stories. We got to some during the course of the campaign. One we did for College of Arts and Sciences about art that was very in depth and had horizontal scroll and all sorts of things going on. We did one for UW Bothell about their gaming lab and preparing students for careers in the gaming industry that had kind of a game theme to it. And it really is about setting people up to work obviously within the brand. So there's a box. So I don't want drawing outside the lines because we do have a brand, but it's a pretty expansive brand, and to give people that opportunity to say, this is what the story is. How do we tell it in words? How do we tell it visually? And how does that all come together? And how does that come together across different channels? Because obviously you have to be able to understand the story solely from the video element, or be able to summarize it in a social post. Clearly, we want to drive people to, and that was the goal, was to drive people to the full story experience, but we needed to also have the ability to tell that story in bits and pieces through those assets. And so we would put together a team with all the different disciplines represented in marketing and communications, and they would work together on how do we tell this story. And you get some really great opportunities of folks bouncing ideas off of each other from different disciplines, and that's how, at the end of the day, you get a great creative product that is unique, that tells the story, and that represents our brand in a very special way.
Yeah, yeah, and you had done some remarkable stories, and I remember you're sharing with me at a certain point the fact that when you were looking at stories, you were trying to find narratives that weren't necessarily just for one area of UW, that you
Yep.
were trying to find narratives that knit together a number of different disciplines. And I understand it a little bit more now that you've talked about affordability, preparing for the future and world class, because I can see those threads running through all of the stories. But I thought it was also interesting, and I'm sure everyone's wondering, how did you pay for this?
Yeah. Well, we're fortunate to be part of a university that has had university leaders in the past and currently who believe in the importance of storytelling, who believe in the importance of marketing communications to the success of the institution. And so, with this being part of a fundraising campaign, we're part of university advancement, and so we had that very direct tie-in to the campaign. We have resources we can draw on from that, and we have basically a full service creative team in-house to where we're able to, with our own staff, produce, I would say, probably 98% of the content. I think there was a couple stories we had some illustration that we got some freelance help on, but everything else is done in-house. And that is really just a reflection of the value that our leadership places in this sort of storytelling. And I would say that the quality of the work that the team does backs that up. And so there is that interest in making that investment.
So you have the writers, photographers, videographers, designers, web developers, like you have all of those people in house.
We do, yeah.
Wow.
And in addition to that, we have the front end web developers, we have the systems engineers, we have all the folks that you would need to be able to take great creative and represent that out into the world on the web, as well as in social media, digital, other digital communications such as email, and we have great partnerships with the folks at University of Washington Magazine, because you'll see sometimes print versions of these stories, because we want to reach people where they are. We don't want to expect them to always have to come to us to hear a great story, and so we try and use all the channels and to, as much as we can, to adjust the story, or how we're telling the story at least, to meet the needs of those channels, and to meet the needs of the university broadly, as well as the colleges and the schools. During the campaign, we would meet with the dean and the chief advancement officer and their chief communicator to say, we're looking for some stories. Here's some of our criteria. Obviously, it has to be compelling, has to have some visual interest to it. Ideally, there's an emotional side to it as well. It's what makes it compelling. And it needs to meet your fundraising priorities, because I don't want to go tell a story that is, it's a great story, but doesn't have like an end point. There's not like an outcome for it, because at the end of all these, there's a call to action saying, basically, you can support this sort of work. You can support the Alaska Salmon Program and help students have these experiences that prepare them for future careers, while at the same time protecting this fishery for future generations. And so those tie-ins always have to have a call to action. If you go to the Boundless website, where you can see more of these stories, uw.edu/boundless, you'll see that top bar with calls to action: apply, give, join the Alumni Association, subscribe to UW Current. This is all about telling great stories for a purpose, and the purpose is to advance the university.
Yes, and I love that you got there, because I was going to ask you about metrics and goals and all of that next anyway. And so I actually want to keep digging into that, because I think it's certainly, I'm assuming, tied to the fight for the head count internally and the budget that it takes to produce these stories. When you can showcase that they were done with a purpose, it's not just like fluff storytelling pieces, but like really meaningfully contributing back to whether it's enrollment or fundraising dollars or whatever it might be. So how in your planning process, where do you start with that and then find the story to support the goal, or how is the end point being intentionally brought in when you are ideating?
Yeah. Well, everything starts from the mission of the university, and we have annual goals in university advancement. We have a strategic plan that is now emerging under President Jones's leadership, and so that is our first input: is what is the university trying to achieve, and how can we support that as a marketing and communications team. After that, we have a set of storytelling priorities. And so that's where you're going to see things like, we really want to emphasize the real-world benefits of a UW degree and how we're preparing students to be successful in their lives and successful in their careers. And we have a cross-channel storytelling team that is led by our AVP for communications and our director of content. And it brings in all the different disciplines. It brings in our brand strategy folks as well. It brings in the folks on the digital side. And they will, every other week, we'll sit down and talk about the stories that we can be telling and how they line up with those storytelling priorities, which themselves ladder up to the institutional goals and priorities. And so things start from, what does the university need us to do in order to be successful? And within that broad framework and within those storytelling priorities, it's kind of a further narrowing, but it's still quite broad in terms of the opportunities we have to tell different sorts of stories. We also, though, want to make sure we're telling stories that are representative of the university broadly, and in all the sorts of different ways that that representation matters, including going into what disciplines are we representing. We don't want to be a situation where we've told 5 STEM stories in a row, and you've got health sciences wondering where are we, or if you got social sciences or humanities. We're a we have 60,000 students at the University of Washington. Every one of them has a remarkable story we could be telling, and we're not going to be able to get to all of them, unfortunately. But we want to have that breadth of storytelling, so that that I think is another way that we show value beyond just metrics, is to show we are representing all of the many different opportunities and disciplines that are here at the university.
That is so cool. And I have noticed, and honestly, if y'all have not checked out the Boundless campaign, go to that URL that Jack just mentioned, because you will be dazzled by the sheer number of storytelling feats of prowess that you will see. It's just incredible. And one of the things I noticed, Jack, is that you went over time from these really long, immersive stories that were very snowfally to more micro stories, more of almost a balanced portfolio, where some stories were shorter, some stories were as immersive as, say, Living Laboratory or Helping the Body to Heal Again, the story of Jaina and the team that helped her to recover, which still makes me cry. Oh, yeah. So tell me about how the strategy evolved and what drove the changes that you have realized with your team in storytelling form.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mentioned we, during the campaign, did a story, an immersive story for every campus, school, college, and major unit. And, coming out of the campaign, that was going to be a difficult pace to maintain. And what we had discovered was, we were doing, these really big set piece stories, and we weren't necessarily able to put the weight on the promotion side behind them in order to get the sort of engagement that would justify, that investment. And we didn't want to get away entirely from doing those big, in-depth stories, but we wanted to open up opportunities for shorter stories that took less of a lift, that we could take some chances on, and that would give us the opportunity to take advantage of emerging events. We're doing we've got a page going. We're hosting the World Cup here in Seattle, and so what are some stories we can tell about the World Cup and opportunities there? And so we've really kind of divided up our storytelling. And if you go to the Boundless site, uw.edu/Boundless, you can do a little graphic along the bottom. You will see a story such as the one about David Baker, our Nobel Prize winning leader of the Institute for Protein Design. And you can go into that story. That's a centerpiece of our brand awareness campaign. And there are, it's just like the immersive stories of old that we would do. It's very in-depth. There's all sorts of creative expressions there, and all the disciplines are represented. And on that same page, you can go to stories, what we call L1 stories, so a level 1 story, where you have maybe just a photographer and a writer teaming up using the modular web features that our web team has built, and building out that story themselves, versus something like the Baker Lab story, where you have developers and they're maybe creating custom modules. And so this gives us a broader spectrum to where we still have those big, in-depth stories, but we have the flexibility and the lighter lift of that L1 story to be able to be quicker, more responsive, and to take chances. Because the last thing we want to do is devote dozens, hundreds of hours of staff time to a story that doesn't land.
Right.
And it's most likely not going to land, not because it's not a good story, but because we didn't maybe have the resources to put behind it to get it in front of people through paid advertising, paid and organic social, and other venues. And so, having this spectrum of different levels enables us to have that flexibility to still do big things and to do these smaller, I would say just as impactful on a dollar-for-dollar basis stories at the same time.
Yeah. That is so cool.
Let's talk about We Are Here. An ad that cost only $1,500 to make, but got 250 million impressions in a football season.
I've had bar bills that are more expensive than $1,500.
I need to hang out with you. I need to hang out with you.
Jack, I owe you at least a couple of glasses of scotch for this, but yes.
All right, we'll work on. I mean, now that you've set a threshold of $1,500, we'll see what we can do.
But tell us about We Are Here. How did that originate? What was the goal? How did you achieve it? Because that's pretty incredible.
It is, and I want to give full credit to our partners across the Big Ten Conference, to Valentina Gomez-Bravo, who's our executive creative director here at UW, who led the joint creative team that put what is now the We Are Here series together, and to the support of Commissioner Petiti and the conference office. We Are Here emerged from a couple of different threads. When we were in the Pac-12, we had worked with our conference peers to put together some ads that were about the collective academic and research impact of our member universities, and to air those on Pac-12 network, because live sports is perhaps one of, if not the most valuable TV airtime that you can buy right now. And we, of course, get a 30-second spot during each of the games we compete in. But generally, conferences, as part of their media rights deals, also get airtime that they can use. And the Big Ten, they had been those institutions have been doing something similar with PSAs for the Big Ten network. And when we joined the Big Ten, started having conversations like, we have been doing this in the Pac-12, and they knew some about that because we had presented on it at conferences. And they said, well, we've been working on these PSAs, but we had yet to be able to kind of crack into the actual broadcast time on ESPN or the other networks. And so we kind of collectively talked about this. Very challenging time for higher education when we need to be using every available resource that we have to rebuild that confidence with our audiences. And college sports demographically and politically trend more conservative, and those are the audiences that higher education has lost at greater numbers. And so we wanted to be able to reach those folks. And so we talked with our presidents and chancellors. We got support on the front end to put a team together, use existing footage to put a spec spot together, put a draft together, and then we're invited to present that at the Big Ten presidents and chancellors meeting. And we had done some audience testing to see how this was going to perform, and made our pitch. And we were asking for something that's worth tens of millions of dollars. And so, we recognized this was a big ask because the Big Ten has initiatives that it wants to carry forward. It has the MAPS ad, which is, is a fan favorite. It's a long-standing ad that, folks on social media really like, and it's fun. And, I like it, as the W first up, in the new version. So I'm like, we're the first logo that pops up on the screen. So I can't complain with that. But we knew that we could also tell that story about the academic and the research impact of these institutions. And so, I want to give, again, credit to Commissioner Petiti. He was the first one to speak after our presentation, and through his support behind this, the presidents and chancellors were on board too, so much so they said, well, we don't want just one ad, we want 3 ads, and can you put more university logos in them, which we had deliberately avoided because we didn't want to get into the situation of, well, this logo is on screen for 0.7 seconds, and our logo is only on screen for 0.3 seconds.
You're avoiding the politics, Jack.
We're trying to. I want to win the middle. That's one other of my mottos, is win the middle. But the team did a great job, and we got it on the air for the start of the football season. It ran alongside MAPS and some other Big Ten ads over the course of the year. They really threw their weight behind it as well. And at the end of the day, we got 250 million impressions, including during the college football playoff national championship, which was won by Big Ten colleagues at Indiana. Got a shout out for them. And we started airing the second spot in the spring or during winter, during basketball season, and we're working on a third spot to be ready for the start of football here in the fall. This should be a model. This should be a model for other conferences and other universities because, again, this airtime is some of the most valuable airtime that we collectively as an industry have. And there, again, is absolutely space to do both the promotion of the conferences and the promotion of the academic and research impact of the member institutions in those conferences. And so if anybody is watching this and would like to talk about how to do this in their conference, please, hit me up. I'd love to talk about it.
That is so awesome. Now, speaking of model, you had shared something with me that I thought was really quite incredible. And when I do storytelling workshops, I talk about the fact that stories play 8 roles in our lives. And the 8th role that I usually call out is that stories help us to define ourselves for ourselves and for other people. But talking with you, I realized that stories actually could serve a ninth purpose. And that ninth purpose is redefining oneself. You were telling me this story about how you tested the words debt-free and how what you learned from that polling actually not only reshaped the story you were telling, it reshaped the university's policy around financial aid. So I would love for you to talk a little bit about the role of story in shaping policy at universities,
Yeah.
because I thought that was absolutely fascinating.
Well, I don't want to take too much credit for it, but yeah, happy to talk about that because it is something that President Jones has been talking about is setting out one of his priorities is a debt-free education for every Washington undergraduate. And we have now for some time, both collectively, and I really want to credit the Association of American Universities. Ken Goldstein has been our contact working with us on our survey research. They and we have been really trying to unlock the solution to the value question. And you've seen people's kind of declining impressions of the value of a college degree. We see that in our own research. How do we address that? And so we have been testing all sorts of different combinations. There's a lot of frustration, I got to tell you, among our academic leaders because they look at how we compare on in-state tuition to peers, and they said, we're more affordable. And I said, I know. And people don't think that. And they're like, well, but do they know how much our tuition is? And I'm like, well, when we ask them, they generally don't. It's usually higher, but hey, we're gonna next time we'll do a split sample. We'll ask them. We'll tell them this is how much it costs to go in-state to the UW over 4 years. Do you think a degree from the UW is valuable and worth the cost? Valuable, not worth the cost, not valuable. And then the other half of the sample will just get the straight up. Do you think it's valuable, worth the cost, etc. We tested that. No effect of knowing tuition. I came back with that and I said, well, but Jack, people think of tuition on an annual basis. So you should ask about annual tuition. And I said, all right. So next time, split sample, annual tuition, no effect. And so President Jones comes on board, 34th president here last August, and we were shared the polling research with him, and we're talking about this. I think that the notion of a debt-free education is a very powerful one, and I agree. And so we went out and we tested first. Just telling people that 70% of Washington undergraduates already graduate debt-free. Knowing that, do you think it's valuable, worth the cost, et cetera? And you had a 20-point gain over just the base perception. And then we said, if the University of Washington is able to make undergraduate education debt-free for all Washington students, do you think it would then be valuable, worth the cost? You get another 18-point gain. So you essentially double the percentage of people who think a UW degree is valuable and it's worth the cost if you're able to get to that hypothetical. And so this is where, when I talk about telling our story better and having a better story to tell, that's where these come together. Because we had that 70% number. We, of course, being in academia, didn't talk about it as debt-free. It was, well, they have no known debt. Because, but there might be debt we don't know about, private sector debt, and we have to have all these caveats. And pretty soon it's going to be like a drug commercial where you have like 70% graduate debt-free, and then the other 25 seconds are like disclaimers and caveats. And honestly, we do the same thing with our Husky Promise program, which provides, tuition, free tuition to students who qualify, but we never say this is the threshold you qualify by. And that's a whole other thing. We're working on that. And then having that better story to tell, making those institutional commitments to be able to achieve that debt-free goal. Because that's a lofty goal, and it's going to take some time, and it's going to take state support, it's going to take federal support, it's going to take philanthropic support, it's going to take changing how we do things so that students graduate faster. Because the longer you're in school, the more you're spending to be in school. And so, bringing all those threads together is going to be important to achieving that goal. But being able to share this research with our academic leadership, with the strategic planning committee, that shows this is what the people of Washington think we should prioritize. This is what they think we're actually prioritizing. I'll just tell you, do not think we're prioritizing being affordable basically at all. That was the biggest gap in priorities expectations that we found. But if we're able to get out there and say, hey, 70% already graduate debt-free, and our goal is to get to that's 100% for Washington students. That's a very powerful message, and it provides kind of a motivating factor for our work institutionally to know that not only will we have the very clear and the top benefit of helping students graduate debt-free, we will also be able to start shifting people's perceptions of higher education. And if we're able to address questions around value, I think that the base of support for higher education in general will rise, and that opens up other opportunities and other priority areas. But if we're not able to tackle value first, I think people are going to continue to think we're out of touch and we're not prioritizing what they want us to prioritize, which again is being affordable and preparing students for future careers at a world-class institution. If we're not taking care of those things, then we're not taking care of what folks think we need to be prioritizing.
Yeah. That's really cool.
When I am out and about on the conference circuit, one of the things that I talk a lot about is that marketing communications is carrying institutional survival. And I feel like the story that you just shared very well aligned with that. Volt, we can unpack that one later.
Yeah. That really helps my stress level. I'm going to need to do this happy hour that Volt's promising.
It's going to be some nice scotch.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, what you just described is a lot of pressure for a communications office to have to uncover all of those insights and then go figure out what to do with it. I mean, of course, you've got the president's support on this, but I don't know that every listener right now has, that level of top-down support, B, the ability to go do the things you just talked about, or C, even maybe the awareness to go do it, right? So, like, that is so powerful, Jack. Yeah. So what's next?
We've taken care of C. They have the awareness now because they're listening to this conversation. And in terms of B, being able to do this, to be able to do this sort of research, we're very fortunate as AAU members to be able to participate in their survey research at a rate that is below what the market would be, because the AAU has prioritized this and to provide that investment alongside our own investment. But there are ways out there to get this sort of data about your institution, about your state, or about your alumni base. Our alumni, we just email them. And so it's not even a matter of having to call people up or doing online panels. We know we can reach the alumni. And so there are cost-effective ways out there where you can get this sort of research, and then for addressing the first point A, to be able to go to your leadership and say, this isn't just me saying this. This is our research. Right. And some people are going to buy into that. Some people are not going to buy into that. That's just how it goes. But you at least have the kind of the backup of it's not just my opinion. It's not just a national survey that you go, well, I don't like Pew, and so I'm going to disregard that. It's like or Gallup or whatever. You can you can go on the list. It's like, no, we conducted this research. We wrote the questions, and this is what our folks are telling us. And I think that's important. I mean, for the whole course of my career, I believed in that our role is both to represent our institutions and to represent our audiences back to the institutions. And sometimes that means telling uncomfortable truths. And I'll tell you, it's a whole lot easier to tell an uncomfortable truth when you have a survey to back that up than when it's just you rolling in. It's like, well, that's just what Jack thinks. And so we're going to go in a different direction.
Jack, as we wind down on this interview, what is the role of the storyteller today? Because we have a really easy way to create stories. It's called Claude or ChatGPT, right? I can enter in a few prompts. I can do a snowfall by tonight, right?
Yeah.
With a little vibe coding. I mean, obviously I'm kidding here, but where is the storyteller's role in 2026 in this world that we now live in? We're surrounded by AI. We're surrounded by slop. I would argue your role is even more important, but I'd like to hear you say that.
Well, I think our role is to make those human connections. And you're absolutely right. You can go to AI. It'll write you up something, and it'll probably be fine. And I would like to do better than fine. And I think our institutions and our students and our faculty deserve better than fine. I think they deserve excellent, human-centered, authentic storytelling, and that's something that only we can do. And so I think that's the role of the storyteller, is to maintain the humanity in all of this. Because at the end of the day, we're getting ready to confer 18,000 degrees across 3 campuses. Each one of those degrees is a story. And each one of those degrees, it represents a life that has been changed by this institution. And so our role as storytellers is to tell those stories and to help those people, those students, those faculty, be the ones to tell the stories. We're just there facilitating the great work that they've done, the accomplishments that they've had. And so I think that is our role, is to maintain the humanity in all this and to make those human connections at a time when it seems like humanity's connections, our connections with each other, are kind of being pulled apart by technology and polarization and things like that. But I think we can help stitch it back together.
That is so awesome. Okay, Mallory, I swore we would not have tears, and I'm like tearing up.
Not again.
I usually make people cry for. I make people cry for other reasons. I come in with the survey research and like, oh, I thought it was going to be better this time, Jack.
Here comes Jack again
Exactly.
with his stack of surveys. No,
Oh,
I mean,
my
that's very
goodness.
inspirational. So I feel the emotion too. It's beautiful.
I love that.
Yeah.
Jack, tell us a little bit about the Orient Express trip. You recently duplicated the route of the Orient Express in your vacation. Why? And how was it?
Yeah, well, the why was a question my wife was asking me when she was saying, I'm not really interested in going on this trip, so have fun, I'll see you when you're back. I've been fortunate. My grandparents, they traveled the world, and they would take us on RV trips. And then when I was 10 years old, they took me to the Abilene, Kansas post office. I still have a picture of me and my grandmother going to get my first passport. And so I was inspired by their travels and what they made possible. And then honestly, I was inspired by Michael Palin, who, the Monty Python alum, who did Around the World in 80 Days and kind of got me interested in overland travel. And so, I like to, be able to get away from time to time. And this time I said, I think I could go from Paris to Istanbul by train. And to stitch together, because the original Orient Express is long gone, and there's a luxury one from Paris to Venice. It's like $10,000 a night. I'm like, well, I'm not going to do that, so I'll just stitch together a train and explore some parts of Europe that I'd never been to, but. Just a fantastic experience. Met a lot of great people, a lot of great foods. I love fried meats, and so had many opportunities for that sort of meal along the way. But
Amazing.
This is I think travel is so important to provide perspective, perspective on your own life and how that compares to lives that other folks are living. Lives that may be very different than ours, maybe very, very similar than ours, just in a different to ours, just in a different context. And so, my wife and I support, an initiative at University of Kansas, our alma mater, to help students get their first passports, because that was a real gift that my grandparents gave to me, and it's something that, even if you're just going state to state, it's a big country, and there's lots of different ways that people live in it, and so, get out there and explore.
Wow.
That is amazing.
Oh my God.
That is so cool.
That's so generous that you're doing that at Kansas. That's so incredible and very meaningful, I'm sure.
Well, and it's also an example of great storytelling, because when they came and pitched it on me, they had all sorts of different things. And then I said, but, we really need help getting passports. Like, well, I know what a passport is, and I know how much it costs. And so I can visualize a student getting their passport. And so that, it's about, using a story to connect with somebody. And so, all kudos to Avery at University of Kansas Endowment.
That's amazing. Jack, this has been such a fantastic interview. Thank you so much. And I cannot
thank you.
wait to see. I mean, I literally have been watching your work for more than a decade, and I cannot wait to see what you and your team are continuing to do, because I really do feel like you all have a huge role in shaping the way that we tell stories for higher education.
So true.
And you've been telling them so beautifully for so long. No pressure, but we're looking to you.
All right. We'll see what we can do to solve this whole thing.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah. Well, Volt,
Mallory, any
Mallory, thank you so
parting?
much. Really, I mean, I appreciate this invite and this opportunity to talk with folks and to really, again, to showcase the work of the team because they're the ones that made all this possible.
Well,
Thanks,
you guys
Jack.
do incredible work. Thank you so much. All right, Mallory, you first.
I mean, my brain is still processing. The ground we covered with Jack in 40 minutes was incredible. And I want to come back to something I said to Jack near the end, like almost in passing, because I actually, now that like as my brain is continuing to process this, I think the whole conversation was maybe about this, but I told him that marketing and communications is carrying institutional survival. And he laughed and then he said, I'll take that scotch that you promised me, Volt. But like, I wasn't kidding when I said that. And I don't think he was kidding when he said he needed the scotch. Because like, I took notes while he was talking. And these are the things he brought up. He ran polling that tells the University of Washington what the public actually thinks about it. He identifies the gaps between what the institution is believing about itself and what the people in Washington believe. And then he's finding words like debt-free that are going to actually move perception. And then he's measuring how it's moving the perception. And then he's taking all of that information back to the president, back to academic leadership, to the strategic planning committee. And he is using it to argue for what the institution should be committing to, not just what stories it's going to draft next week, but like what the strategic priorities are of the school. And like his title is VP of Marketing Communications, and a lot of that is not communications. Like that is intelligence work. Like that's the function that tells a university like what it doesn't know about itself and then helps it decide what it needs to become. And you said this so beautifully, Volt, that maybe you found this like ninth thing that storytelling can do for us. And you said that stories can help us redefine ourselves. And I feel like Jack, like that was a 40-minute exercise in how Jack has helped redefine what the University of Washington is.
It really is incredible when you think about it, because we usually talk about when we talk about the purposes that story serves in our lives. I find that a lot of times it is not that, I think reactive is probably a fair word, or representative of a reality that is already there, right? And I talk in storytelling workshops about how stories help us to define ourselves not only for ourselves but for others. Yeah. But Jack is pushing it further, and he's using story, like you said, to help an institution not only redefine itself but refine itself, all in service to the students. And when he said every diploma that we issue is a story, I was like, oh my gosh, that is absolutely right. And I've got to tell you, I have been following Jack's work for more than a decade now.
Yes.
And so while you were looking at this from the strategy and the measurement angle, I started the conversation thinking about the sheer feat of creativity that
Yes.
the storytelling he and his team have done, the sheer feat that it is. And the conversation helped me to understand that it's even deeper than that. So if you look at the work that they do on the Boundless campaign, it's some beautiful storytelling steeped in the sort of history, or steeped in the discipline that Snowfall sort of inspired in us from years and years ago. But then when he started talking about the fact that he was doing research and polling to help understand what really matters to people, and making sure that the stories that they tell touch upon what he called the big three, which is affordability, helping students prepare for the future at a world-class institution. When I realized that that was like the foundational motivation, I then began to see, oh, that's right. When I think about the stories that I digested from Boundless, that thread is there. And then when you asked him at the end, what is the role of storyteller today? And he said, it's to maintain humanity at a time when technology and polarization are pulling us apart. I was like, wow, that is the heart and the soul of a storyteller. That is so awesome.
Let's keep talking about that for a sec, because everyone is talking about how AI is going to change content production in general, like faster drafts, and you can scale personalization and create more output, and maybe that's the boring part now, because well, like Google's announcement this spring, right? The biggest change to the search bar in 25 years. They announced agents that are going to be coming out this summer. It's really made me think about like what AI is doing to our audiences, and prospective families are going to get their answers from AI. Google search is AI. Right? Like you don't have to go to this third party anymore. And they're going to get their answers from AI before they ever land on our university's website. And so they're asking AI questions like what college is worth. And even legislators are going to be using AI to like summarize what people think about higher ed. And, so like the public is forming all of these opinions about institutions like the University of Washington, like through this layer that Jack can't really control. So I think that, what is the role of the storyteller now? Well, I think it's not just about telling better stories. It's about making sure all of the underlying facts about your institution, like the things that AI is going to surface about you and somebody asks about it, like that needs to be accurate and visible and consistent. And he touched on that, like, the web team's thinking about it, but like even our icon Jack like admits like no one has figured this out quite yet. So I am so curious to continue to watch like where things go at Washington, because I feel like the storytellers who are going to matter the most in the next 5 years are the ones who understand that AI isn't just a production tool to integrate into the current like workflow of the team, but it is a separate audience. Like it is its own new audience layer, and like every story we have to tell has to pass through that layer before it actually reaches a human.
Yeah. Mallory, I don't even know what to do with that one.
No. This is where my brain's going after talking to Jack. I feel like he unlocked like things that I didn't know existed. The wheels are spinning in different directions now, Volt.
My mind hurts. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh my goodness. Well, I am so thrilled that we got the chance to learn from him, because I really do think that he and his team have done some of the best storytelling work in higher education for more than a decade now. And as we said at the close of our conversation with him, I can't wait to see where they take this, because we're all watching, we're all learning from the beautiful work that they do. And I continue to be absolutely inspired by the way that they are able to find the narrative thread, the way that they're able to weave stories that are multidisciplinary together, and the fact that everything that they do is really steeped in this idea of creating human connection.
It's incredible. Well, as we close out this episode of Higher Ed Icons, I will remind you listeners that if you haven't done it yet, please hit subscribe wherever you are listening to this podcast. Give us a 5-star rating, maybe even leave a comment if you particularly liked this episode with Jack, or send it along to a friend who works at a different institution or in a different unit within yours who maybe is struggling to tell their story. Hopefully this will help inspire you and inspire them. And Volt, shall we leave them with our parting thoughts?
Oh, what should we be, Mallory?
Iconic.
Thanks, everyone. Talk soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Higher Ed Icons celebrates the pioneers, thought leaders, and changemakers who have shaped and continue to shape higher education marketing.
New episodes drop every other Tuesday. Subscribe and leave us a rating wherever you listen.
Higher Ed Icons is made possible by our founding sponsor, On Deck Marketing, keeping colleges and universities visible where students learn, walk, and scroll.
Learn more at ondeckmarketing.com. That's ondeckmktg.com to learn more.